Swanswood Castle devoured cooks like kindling. The Duke hadn't spoken in 3 years, not since they found his bride poisoned. Then Marianne arrived from America, running from her own ghosts, and their forbidden passion lit a fuse that would explode his cousin's lies and set a killer free. Or hang.
Hello. If you believe every underdog deserves to be seen and lifted up, your support means more than you know. Hitting 1,000 subscribers isn't just a number for us, it's what allows these real, hopeful stories to reach people who might desperately need them to stay motivated.
The fog rolled thick off the River Nene, turning Northampton into a city of ghosts. Marianne Clark pressed her face against the mail coach window, watching England slide past in shades of gray and smoke. Nothing like the sharp Atlantic wind and white church steeples of Boston she'd left behind. Nothing like home. Her carpet bag sat beside her on the worn leather seat, light as broken promises. Inside lay 2 spare dresses, her mother's recipe book, and a letter of reference from the only woman in New England who'd believed her innocent. The rest, her reputation, her late husband's good name, the small brick house on Beacon Hill, had been swallowed whole by lies she couldn't prove false and wouldn't dignify with denial. The advertisement had found her in a coaching inn outside London, printed in a week-old newspaper someone had left behind. Cook needed at Swanswood Castle, Northampton. Discretion essential. American applicants considered. Those last 3 words had felt like a lifeline thrown across dark water. The coach turned north, leaving cobblestone streets for rutted country roads. Rain began to fall, cold and insistent, drumming against the roof like fingers of the dead. Through the streaming window, Marianne caught her first glimpse of Swanswood Castle rising from the mist. 4 towers clawed at low clouds, crumbling battlements, windows dark as closed coffins. Gargoyles leered from the parapets, their stone faces worn smooth by centuries of English weather. Beautiful and terrible, like something out of a nightmare. The driver helped her down at the iron gatehouse, his weathered face carefully neutral. "You're expected, Mrs. Clark, though I'll warn you, most don't last a month up there." "Why not?" she asked, retrieving her bag from the boot. He glanced toward the castle, then back at her with something uncomfortably close to pity. "The Duke doesn't take kindly to questions or company. In the castle," he shook his head. "Well, you'll see soon enough, I reckon." The gates groaned open on rusted hinges, revealing a courtyard choked with weeds pushing through cracked stone. A crow cawed from somewhere above, harsh and mocking. The rain fell harder. Marianne lifted her chin and walked forward. She'd crossed an ocean to escape in one haunted house. What was one more in? The massive oak door opened before she could knock. A tall woman in severe black stood framed against dim candlelight, her face carved from disapproval and winter. "Mrs. Dalton," the woman said. "Housekeeper." "You're the American." "Marianne Clark, ma'am." Mrs. Dalton's eyes traveled slowly over her damp traveling dress, her plain bonnet, the carpet bag that held everything she owned in this world. "His Grace the Duke sees no one, speaks to no one if he can help it. You'll keep to the kitchens, the servants' wing, and the gardens for herbs. Nothing more. Understood?" "Perfectly." "Good." The housekeeper stepped aside. "Because the last cook who wandered where she shouldn't." She paused deliberately, letting the unfinished sentence hang like a noose. "She left in the middle of the night, didn't even collect her wages." The door closed behind Marianne with a sound like a crypt sealing shut. The entrance hall stretched before her. Marble floors cracked with age. Portraits of stern ancestors staring down with hostile eyes. Candlelight too weak to chase shadows from the vaulted corners. Dust motes drifted through the air like ash. The smell was old stone, mildew, and something else. Neglect, perhaps. Or despair. Somewhere high above, footsteps echoed. Slow, deliberate. The tread of a man pacing a cell he couldn't escape. Marianne followed Mrs. Dalton deeper into the castle, down stone corridors lined with more portraits, their subjects' eyes seeming to follow her passage. The temperature dropped with each turn. Her breath began to mist. The kitchen, when they finally reached it, was a cavern of blackened brick and tarnished copper, cold as a January grave. The massive hearth stood empty, the iron stove coated in grease and ash. Cobwebs draped the corners like funeral shrouds. Breakfast at 7 sharp, dinner at 1, supper at 8, Mrs. Dalton recited, her voice echoing off stone walls. His Grace takes all meals in his study on the 3rd floor. You'll prepare a tray, leave it outside his door. You'll not see him, and he'll not see you. That's how he prefers things. And if I need to speak with him about provisions, repairs, the household accounts, the housekeeper's expression hardened to flint. You'll speak to me. The Duke of Swanswood hasn't held a proper conversation with anyone in 3 years. Not since Lady Caroline. She stopped herself, lips pressed thin. Just do your work, Mrs. Clark. Keep your head down, your questions to yourself, and you might last longer than the others. After Mrs. Dalton's footsteps faded up the stairs, Marianne stood alone in the ancient kitchen. Rain hammered the narrow windows set high in the walls. The stove was cold, the larder nearly bare. Shelves lined with dust and mouse droppings. The air hung thick with years of neglect. She set down her carpet bag and slowly rolled up her sleeves. A small figure appeared in the doorway, a girl no more than 15, all bones and wide eyes. I'm Bess Fletcher, ma'am, kitchen maid. Well, I'm supposed to be, only there hasn't been much cooking to help with. Not proper cooking, not since... Since when, Bess? The girl's voice dropped to a whisper. Since her ladyship died 3 years ago come Christmas. They found her in the garden, the poison bottle in her hand. They say his Grace hasn't been right since. Locks himself in that tower, pacing all night like a ghost himself. Mrs. Dalton says he's gone mad with grief. Marianne studied the girl's frightened face. What do you say? Bess glanced toward the door, then back. I say this castle's been dying right along with him, ma'am, and I don't know if even you can bring it back to life. That night, after scrubbing the worst of the grime and coaxing the old stove to life, Marianne lay in her narrow bed in the servants' wing. The room was small but clean, with a window overlooking the wild gardens and a sturdy lock on the door. Outside, wind moaned through the battlements like something in pain. Then she heard them. Footsteps directly above her. Slow, measured, endless. Pacing from one end of the room to the other, over and over, the tread of a man who'd forgotten how to rest. The Duke of Swanswood, walking his cage. Marianne closed her eyes, but sleep wouldn't come. She'd fled Boston's whispers and pointing fingers, sailed across a cold Atlantic, and landed here in this decaying castle at the edge of England. She'd been running from ghosts since the day they'd lowered her husband into frozen New England ground. But perhaps it was time to stop running. Perhaps it was time to face the darkness, both the one haunting these ancient walls and the one she'd carried across the sea in her own scarred heart. Tomorrow she would begin, not just cooking, but something more. Tomorrow she would begin, not just cooking, but something more. Tomorrow she would bring light back to Swanswood Castle, one meal at a time, whether its broken duke wanted saving or not. Dawn came gray and cold. Marianne woke before 5, the pacing above her having finally stopped sometime near 3. She dressed quickly, pinned her dark hair tight, and descended to the kitchen while the castle still slept. The stove fought her, but she'd tamed worse. By 6, flames crackled behind the iron door. Heat beginning to spread through the cavern. She'd found flour in the larder. Butter gone nearly rancid, but salvageable. Eggs from hens, Bess swore still laid despite neglect. Her hands moved with the muscle memory of 1,000 Boston mornings, kneading dough, testing the oven's temperature with her palm. By 7, the smell of fresh bread filled the kitchen. Real bread, not the hard biscuits the previous cook had apparently survived. On, she added butter, honey she'd discovered in a forgotten cupboard, strong tea that actually had flavor. Mrs. Dalton appeared in the doorway, surprise flickering across her stern features before the mask returned. His Grace's tray? Here, Marianne had prepared it carefully. Soft bread, perfectly cooked eggs, tea in a clean pot. Simple, but made with care the castle hadn't seen in years. The housekeeper lifted the tray, paused, then said grudgingly, "It smells proper." "It is proper, Mrs. Dalton." After she left, Bess crept in, eyes wide. "You really think he'll eat it? Most days the trays come back untouched." "Then today will be different." The morning passed in hard work. Marianne scrubbed shelves, took inventory, made lists of what the kitchen needed. Around noon, a man appeared in the doorway, weathered face and kind eyes, smelling of horses and leather. "Thomas Granger, ma'am, stable master." He pulled off his cap. "Heard we finally got someone who knows a kitchen from a coal scuttle. The lads and I, we were wondering if there might be a proper dinner today." "There will be, Mr. Granger. 1 o'clock sharp." His smile was genuine. "Lord, it's good to hear that again." She fed them at the long servants' table, 7 men who worked the stables and grounds. Beef stew thick with vegetables, bread still warm, apple tart made from preserves she'd found in the cellar. The room filled with the low hum of satisfaction, the scrape of spoons, actual conversation instead of silent misery. Thomas caught her eye and nodded thanks. Even Mrs. Dalton, eating at the head of the table, seemed to soften slightly. That night, preparing the Duke's supper tray, Marianne made a decision. She carried it upstairs herself, climbing 3 flights of stone steps until she reached the tower corridor. A single door stood at the end, light showing beneath. She knocked. No answer. She knocked again. "Leave it." The voice was rough, unused, edged with something that might have been anger or might have been pain. "Your Grace, the kitchen needs—" "I said leave it." Marianne set down the tray and turned to go, then stopped. "The stove is failing, the larder's nearly empty. The accounts are 3 months behind. I can make do, but not for long. Someone needs to authorize expenditures." Silence, then, "See Mrs. Dalton." "Mrs. Dalton says only you can authorize them." A longer silence. She heard movement, the creak of a chair. Footsteps approaching the door. It opened 6 inches. A man's face appeared in the gap, half-shadowed. Dark hair unkempt, gray eyes sharp as winter, a jaw that hadn't seen a razor in days. He was younger than she'd expected, perhaps 35, and would have been handsome if not for the hollowness, the haunted look of someone who'd stopped sleeping, stopped living. Stephen Bellingham, Duke of Swanswood, studied her with an intensity that made her want to step back. She held her ground. "You're the American," he said finally. "Marianne Clark. You cook well, better than the last 3 combined." "Thank you, Your Grace." His eyes traveled over her face, searching for something. Pity, perhaps, or judgment. She gave him neither, just met his gaze steadily. "Why did you come here?" he asked. "To this godforsaken pile of stones at the end of England?" "I needed work. You were hiring. There's work in London, Manchester, places that don't require living in a mausoleum. Perhaps I prefer quiet." Something almost like a smile touched his mouth, bitter and brief. "Quiet, yes, there's plenty of that here. Quiet and ghosts and dust, not much else. There's food now," she said simply. "And heat. Small things, but they matter." He stared at her for a long moment, then reached into his study and retrieved a leather folder. "The household accounts. Authorization for provisions. Do what needs doing. Just—" He paused. "Don't ask me questions. Don't try to fix me. Cook your meals, keep the household running, and stay out of my way." "As you wish, Your Grace." "And Mrs. Clark?" His voice stopped her as she turned. "That's twice now you've knocked on my door. Don't make it a habit." "I came about the accounts, nothing more." "See that it stays that way." The door closed, but through the crack she'd glimpsed his study, papers scattered everywhere, empty brandy bottles, books piled on every surface, and on the mantel, a portrait of a young woman with blonde hair and sad eyes, Lady Caroline. The bride who died with poison on her lips and secrets in her heart. Walking back down the tower stairs, Marianne felt the folder's weight in her hands. It was more than accounts and authorizations. It was the first crack in the Duke's armor, the first sign that beneath the anger and isolation, something still lived. She'd seen that look before, in her own mirror, back in Boston, after they'd buried her husband and the whispers started. The look of someone drowning who'd forgotten how to reach for help. That night, the pacing started earlier, heavier. She heard him moving above, restless and relentless. But when she checked the dinner tray outside his door the next morning, the plate was empty. Every scrap of food gone. It wasn't much, but it was a beginning. Mrs. Dalton noticed too. "He ate," she said, surprise clear in her voice. First time in weeks he's finished a meal. Good food helps, Marianne replied, kneading dough. It's more than that. The housekeeper's voice was quieter now. You knocked on his door. No one's done that in 3 years. Most are too frightened. Should I be frightened, Mrs. Dalton? The older woman studied her carefully. I don't know yet, Mrs. Clark, but I'll tell you this much. You've woken something in this castle. Whether that's a blessing or a curse, time will tell. Outside the kitchen window, a weak sun broke through the clouds. Just for a moment, just enough to touch the wild gardens with gold. Somewhere in the tower above, the Duke of Swanswood stood at his window, watching that same light, a woman's voice still echoing in his mind. Small things matter. He couldn't remember the last time anyone had said something so simple and so true. The first week passed in careful routine. Marianne cooked, cleaned, and slowly brought order to the chaos. The Duke's trays went up 3 times daily and came back empty. Sometimes she found notes tucked under the plate. More of the roast beef, less salt on the potatoes. The apple tart was exceptional. Brief, impersonal, but communication nonetheless. Thomas and the stable hands became allies, helping her clear the kitchen garden, repair the broken pump. Bess blossomed under patient instruction, learning to knead bread properly, to judge an oven's heat. Even Mrs. Dalton thawed by degrees, sharing keys to locked pantries and cellars Marianne hadn't known existed. The castle was waking up, but its master remained locked away. Until the night she found him in the library. She'd come down past midnight, unable to sleep, seeking the book of recipes she'd left in the kitchen. Candlelight spilled from the library doorway. She should have kept walking, should have remembered his warning about staying away, but something made her pause. Stephen Bellingham sat in a leather chair by the dying fire, a book unopened in his lap, staring at nothing. He'd shaved finally, revealing a strong jaw and features that would have graced any London drawing room, but his eyes held that same hollow emptiness. Can't sleep either, he said without looking up. She stepped inside. The castle is loud at night. Loud? He glanced at her then. It's silent as a tomb. Exactly. A pause, then something that might have been a laugh, dry and rusty. You have a strange way of seeing things, Mrs. Clark. So I've been told, Your Grace. He gestured to a chair across from him. Against every rule of propriety, every warning Mrs. Dalton had given, Marianne sat. They talked, about nothing important at first. Books, the weather, how the garden might be restored come spring. But slowly, carefully, the conversation deepened. He told her about the castle, inherited from his father along with debts and duty, about the weight of a title that felt more like chains, about Caroline, beautiful and fragile, who'd seemed to love the idea of being a duchess more than the reality of being his wife. They said she took her own life, he said, voice barely above a whisper. Found her in the garden with a bottle of laudanum. The inquest ruled suicide. I've spent 3 years asking why I didn't see it coming, why I couldn't save her. Marianne's throat tightened. I know something about guilt, Your Grace. His eyes found hers. Do you? My husband died of pneumonia, quick and cruel. But before he died, we'd argued about money, about his business debts I didn't know existed. The last words I spoke to him were angry ones. She paused. When he was gone, Boston society whispered I'd driven him to his grave, that I'd been unfaithful, cold, grasping. None of it true, but truth doesn't matter when people want a story. So you ran. I survived. There's a difference. He leaned forward, firelight catching the gray of his eyes. You're stronger than you look, Mrs. Clark. So are you, Your Grace. You've just forgotten. The air between them felt suddenly charged, fragile as spun glass. His gaze traveled over her face, lingering on her mouth. She should stand, leave, remember her place. She didn't move. Marianne, he said, testing her name like unfamiliar wine. Your Grace. Stephen, when it's just us, call me Stephen. That wouldn't be appropriate. Nothing about this is appropriate. He rose, crossing to her chair. You knocked on my door. You brought warmth back to this frozen pile of stone. You sit here at midnight talking to a man half mad with grief and isolation. And you're worried about using my Christian name? She stood, bringing them face to face. Too close. Far too close. You're not mad, she whispered. You're mourning. There's a difference. His hand lifted, almost touching her cheek, then dropped. You should go. Yes, neither moved. Marianne, her name again, rougher now, waited with 3 years of loneliness. If you stay, I won't be able to. The rest of the words died as he kissed her. It wasn't gentle. It was desperate, hungry, the kiss of a man drowning who'd finally found air. His hands framed her face, then slid into her hair, scattering pins. She gasped against his mouth and he deepened the kiss, backing her against the bookshelf until volumes pressed into her spine. This was madness, ruin, everything she'd fled Boston to escape. She kissed him back anyway. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, his forehead rested against hers. God help me, he whispered. I can't stop thinking about you. The sound of your voice, the way you move through my castle like you belong here. I haven't felt alive in 3 years. And then you arrive and suddenly, well, I remember what it's like to want something. Stephen, I know. I know all the reasons this is impossible. You're my employee. I'm a duke. Society would crucify us both. But right now, in this moment, I don't care. She pulled back, hands shaking. You should care. We both should. This can't happen again. Can it? No. But the word lacked conviction. He smiled then, sad and knowing. You're lying to yourself, Marianne. I can see it in your eyes. You feel it too. She did. God help her, she did. Good night, Your Grace, she managed. Stephen, he corrected softly. She fled before she could change her mind. Back in her room, door locked, heart hammering, Marianne pressed her fingers to her lips. They still burned from his kiss. She could still smell him, leather and smoke and something darker, more intoxicating. This was dangerous. This was impossible. This was exactly what she wanted and everything she couldn't have. Above her, the pacing started again. But it sounded different now. Not the tread of a man in a cage, but the restless steps of someone fighting a battle they were already losing. She closed her eyes and knew that everything had just changed. The castle had woken up, and so had they both. Tomorrow would bring consequences. But tonight in the dark, she let herself remember the feel of his mouth on hers and wonder what it might be like to stop running, stop surviving, and finally, dangerously, live. If this story has captured your heart, don't let it end here. Subscribe to experience every forbidden moment, every dangerous secret, and the scandalous truth that will either save them or destroy them both. The Duke's cousin is coming, and he's already sharpening his knives. The morning after the kiss, Marianne woke to shouting in the courtyard. She dressed quickly and rushed to the kitchen window. A gleaming black carriage stood before the entrance, matched horses stamping impatiently. Footmen in expensive livery unloaded trunks while Mrs. Dalton hovered, flustered in a way Marianne had never seen. Bess appeared at her elbow, face pale. It's Lord Edmund Bellingham, ma'am, His Grace's cousin. He never comes unless there's trouble. Through the window, Marianne watched a man descend from the carriage. Tall, impeccably dressed in London fashion, every inch the aristocrat. Where Stephen was dark and brooding, Edmund was fair and polished, his smile charming as he greeted Mrs. Dalton. But something about that smile made Marianne's skin crawl. Stephen emerged from the castle, and even from a distance, Marianne could see his shoulders stiffen. The two men faced each other, Edmund speaking with animated gestures while Stephen stood rigid, jaw tight. They hate each other, Bess whispered. Always have. Lord Edmund thinks the dukedom should have been his, seeing as his father was the elder brother before the carriage accident. But Stephen inherited. His father was the second son, but he married better, had Stephen first. When the elder brother died childless, the title passed to Stephen's father, then to Stephen. Lord Edmund's been bitter ever since. Marianne watched Edmund clap Stephen on the shoulder with false affection. Stephen flinched. That afternoon, Edmund appeared in the kitchen doorway. Up close, he was handsome in a cold way, ice blue eyes missing nothing. His gaze swept over Marianne like an assessment. You must be the new cook, the American everyone's whispering about. She curtsied. Mrs. Clark, my lord. Ah, yes, a widow. How terribly convenient. His smile sharpened. Tell me, Mrs. Clark, how does one go from Boston society to servitude in an English castle? That's quite a fall. I prefer to think of it as a fresh start. Do you? He picked up a spoon from the table, examined it, set it down with deliberate care. And has Cousin Stephen been welcoming? His grace has been fair. Fair, what a careful word. Edmund moved closer. You should know, Mrs. Clark, that my cousin is not well. 3 years ago, his fiancée died under tragic circumstances. Some say the grief drove him mad. Others suggest darker causes. Either way, he's hardly fit to manage an estate this size. I've come to help shoulder the burden. That's generous of you, my lord. Isn't it? His eyes held hers. I also bring good news. Lady Victoria Hartley arrives tomorrow from London, a woman of impeccable breeding and fortune. My cousin needs a proper wife, someone who can restore the Bellingham name. I'm sure you understand how important that is. The message was clear. Know your place. Of course, my lord. Will Lady Victoria be staying long? As long as necessary. He smiled again. I trust you'll prepare something exceptional for dinner tonight. We have much to discuss. After he left, Marianne's hands trembled as she chopped vegetables. Bess touched her arm. He's poisoned, that one. Always has been. That night at dinner, Edmund held court in the Great Hall, insisting Stephen join him. Marianne prepared roast lamb, winter vegetables, trifle with cream. Mrs. Dalton carried the dishes up while Marianne cleaned the kitchen, trying to ignore the laughter echoing from above. Edmund's laughter, not Stephen's. Later, she heard footsteps on the servants' stairs. Stephen appeared in the kitchen doorway, face drawn. He knows, Stephen said without preamble. Her heart stopped. Knows what? About us. Last night. Edmund has eyes everywhere in this castle. One of the maids saw you leaving the library after midnight. Nothing happened. Marianne. He crossed to her, voice urgent. It doesn't matter what happened. What matters is what he can make people believe. Edmund's already suggesting I'm unsuitable to manage the estate. If he adds a scandal involving a servant, I'll leave tonight if necessary. No, his hands gripped her shoulders. That's what he wants. To isolate me again, remove anyone who might give me strength. But we have to be more careful. No more midnight conversations. No more. Kisses, she finished. Yes. They stood close, neither moving. Finally, Stephen stepped back. Lady Victoria arrives tomorrow. Edmund's chosen her as my bride. I have to at least appear to consider it. The words hit like a slap. Of course, Your Grace. Don't. His voice was rough. Don't call me that. Not after last night. What else should I call you? We both know what this is, what it has to be. Before he could answer, Edmund's voice carried down the stairs. Stephen? Where have you gotten to? Stephen's jaw clenched. I have to go. He left without looking back. The next morning, another carriage arrived. Lady Victoria Hartley descended in a cloud of silk and perfume. Blonde hair perfectly arranged, smile calculated to charm. She was beautiful in the way that expensive things are beautiful, cold and untouchable. Edmund introduced her to Stephen in the entrance hall. Marianne watched from the kitchen doorway as Lady Victoria took Stephen's arm, laughing at something Edmund said. They made a perfect picture, the three of them. Aristocratic, proper. Everything Marianne could never be. Over the following days, Edmund's campaign began in earnest. He questioned the household accounts, suggesting irregularities. He spoke to the staff, asking pointed questions about Marianne's background, her references, her habits. He arranged outings for Stephen and Lady Victoria, ensuring they were constantly together. Marianne found her room searched one afternoon, clothes moved, her mother's recipe book left open on the bed. A warning. Thomas pulled her aside in the garden. Be careful, Mrs. Clark. I've seen Lord Edmund like this before. When he wants something gone, it disappears. And I think he wants you gone. Why, I'm just a cook. Thomas's weathered face was serious. You're more than that. And he knows it. You're the first person in 3 years who's made His Grace want to live again. That makes you dangerous. That night, Edmund cornered her in the corridor outside the kitchen. His charming mask had slipped. Let me be direct, Mrs. Clark. You have two choices. Leave Swanswood quietly with a generous payment and a letter of reference, or stay and watch as I systematically destroy what little reputation you have left. I know about Boston, about the whispers, about your late husband's debts and the woman he was allegedly involved with before his death. Her blood ran cold. That's a lie. Is it? Does it matter? Mud sticks, Mrs. Clark, especially to women in your position. So what will it be? She met his cold eyes. I'm staying. Edmund's smile was a knife. I was hoping you'd say that. I do so enjoy a challenge. He walked away whistling, leaving Marianne alone in the shadows, wondering what she'd just unleashed. Edmund's invitation arrived on thick cream paper, delivered to every notable family in Northampton. The annual county assembly at the Grand Assembly Rooms, reinstated after years of absence. The Duke of Swanswood would attend with his honored guest, Lady Victoria Hartley. All were welcome to celebrate the Duke's return to society. Mrs. Dalton received an invitation as well, with a handwritten note. Please bring your excellent cook, Mrs. Clark. Lady Victoria wishes to meet the woman whose cooking has so impressed the household. It's a trap, Thomas said when Marianne showed him the note in the stable yard. Lord Edmund doesn't do kind gestures. I know, but if I refuse, it looks like I'm hiding something. And if you go, she thought of Edmund's cold smile, then I walk into whatever he's planned with my eyes open. The night of the assembly, Marianne wore her only good dress, black silk from her Boston days. Simple, respectable, widow's weeds that screamed her station. Mrs. Dalton accompanied her in the carriage, silent, intense. The assembly rooms blazed with light, filled with Northampton's finest. Marianne felt every eye turn as she entered, whispers spreading like fire through dry grass. That's her. The American, living alone at Swanswood with the Duke and all those men. Edmund materialized at her elbow, impeccably dressed, playing the gracious host. Mrs. Clark, how delighted we are you could join us. Come, Lady Victoria is eager to make your acquaintance. He guided her through the crowd to where Stephen stood with Lady Victoria. Stephen's eyes widened when he saw Marianne, something flashing across his face. Warning, fear. Before he could speak, Lady Victoria extended a gloved hand. Mrs. Clark, how lovely to finally meet you. Stephen speaks so highly of your cooking. Her smile was porcelain perfect. Tell me, how does an American widow find herself in service at an English castle? It must be quite a story. Not particularly, my lady, I needed work. His Grace was kind enough to employ me. Kind? Lady Victoria's laugh was crystalline. Yes, Stephen has always been too kind for his own good. Edmund says it's his greatest weakness. Edmund appeared with champagne. A toast, he announced, loud enough to draw attention. To Mrs. Clark, whose dedication to Swanswood has been remarkable. Some might even say extraordinary. The emphasis on the last word made it sound obscene. Nearby conversations stopped. Edmund, Stephen's voice carried a warning. What? I'm simply acknowledging her service. Edmund's smile widened. Though I confess, certain irregularities have come to my attention. Mrs. Clark, did you authorize the purchase of silver serving pieces last month? The existing pieces were tarnished beyond interesting. Because several valuable heirloom pieces have gone missing from the butler's pantry, pieces that have been in the Bellingham family for generations. The room went silent. Marianne's blood turned to ice. I would never. Of course not. Yet they're gone. Edmund gestured to a footman who brought forward a small chest. Found this morning in the servants' wing. In your quarters, Mrs. Clark. The footman opened the chest. Silver gleamed inside. Forks, spoons, a serving platter, each piece bearing the Bellingham crest. There must be a mistake, Marianne whispered. The only mistake, a woman's voice called from the crowd, was letting an American adventuress into a noble household. Edmund pulled a folded paper from his coat. I also have this, from a London newspaper, dated 3 weeks ago. He began reading aloud. The Mad Duke of Swanswood, reclusive since his fiancée's tragic death, has apparently found comfort in the arms of his American cook. Sources close to the household report midnight assignations in brazen impropriety behind castle walls. The room erupted. Ladies gasped. Men muttered. Lady Victoria stepped away from Marianne as though from something diseased. "That's a lie," Marianne said, but her voice was lost in the chaos. Edmund continued, relentless. The article goes on to suggest that Mrs. Clark fled Boston under suspicious circumstances. Something about her late husband's debts and an affair that may have hastened his death. "Stop!" Stephen's voice cut through the noise like a blade. But Edmund wasn't finished. "The question before us, ladies and gentlemen, is simple. Should we allow such a woman to remain in our county? To corrupt a noble household? To prey upon a man weakened by grief?" I said, "Stop." Stephen moved forward, but Edmund blocked his path. "The evidence speaks for itself, cousin. The stolen silver, the scandal, her questionable past." Edmund turned to the crowd. "I move that Mrs. Clark be removed from Swanswood immediately and banned from Northampton. All in favor?" Hands began to rise. One by one, Northampton society turned against her. Marianne stood frozen, the room spinning. This was Boston all over again. The accusations, the pointing fingers, the trial by gossip where truth didn't matter and defense was impossible. She should have run when she had the chance. Then the doors burst open. Stephen stood in the entrance, rain streaming from his coat. He'd been outside, had missed Edmund's opening moves. Now his eyes swept the scene, taking in Marianne's pale face, the silver, the newspaper, the condemning crowd. "What is the meaning of this?" His voice was deadly quiet, and Edmund smiled triumphantly. "Justice, cousin. Finally." Stephen crossed the room in long strides. He took Marianne's hand, and the simple gesture sent shock rippling through the assembly. "This woman," Stephen said, his voice carrying to every corner, "has shown me more honor in 3 months than this room has shown in 3 generations. She saved my household from collapse. She brought warmth back to a place that was dying. And you dare accuse her based on planted evidence and London gossip?" "Stephen, be reasonable," Lady Victoria began. "Reasonable?" He turned to her. "What's reasonable about condemning someone without trial? What's reasonable about believing a scandal sheet over the evidence of decent work and honest character?" "The silver was found in her room," Edmund said smoothly. "The silver you planted there." Stephen's eyes were cold fire. "Did you think I wouldn't notice the dates? Those pieces weren't missing until you arrived, Edmund. Just as the newspaper article appeared the day after you visited London. How much did you pay them?" Edmund's composure cracked slightly. "You're mad, everyone knows it." "Perhaps I am, but if she leaves Swanswood, I leave with her." Stephen pulled Marianne closer. "I'll renounce the title, the estate, everything. Let you have the dukedom you've always wanted, but you'll do it knowing you destroyed an innocent woman to get it." The assembly erupted in scandal. Lady Victoria fainted dramatically. Dalton stood in the corner, tears streaming down her face. And Edmund's smile turned to something dark and terrible. "You'll regret this, Stephen," he hissed. "Both of you will regret this." Stephen didn't waver. He kept Marianne's hand in his as he led her through the crowd, through the doors, into the rain-soaked night. Behind them, Northampton society dissolved into chaos, and Edmund Bellingham's carefully laid plans began to unravel. But not before he could set one final deadly trap. The ride back to Swanswood was silent except for rain hammering the carriage roof. Stephen sat across from Marianne, his jaw tight, hands clenched. Mrs. Dalton had wisely chosen to return later, leaving them alone. "You shouldn't have done that," Marianne said finally. "Done what? Told the truth?" "Ruined yourself for me." Her voice broke. "I'm not worth it." He moved to sit beside her, taking her face in his hands. "You're worth everything, and I'm tired of letting Edmund poison my life. He'll destroy you now. Let him try." But Edmund's retaliation came swifter than either anticipated. By morning, tradesmen were refusing credit. The butcher, the baker, the coal merchant, all citing concerns about the household's moral character. Letters arrived from the bishop, from Stephen's solicitor in London, from distant relatives, all expressing shock and demanding explanations. Thomas found notices posted in Northampton Village. Citizens concerned about moral decay at Swanswood Castle are encouraged to make their views known. Edmund's signature at the bottom. He's turning the whole county against us, Stephen said, standing at his study window. Marianne brought him tea he didn't drink. I should leave. Take the scandal with me. No, he turned to her. That's exactly what he wants. To isolate me again, remove anyone who gives me strength. Then what do we do? Before he could answer, Thomas burst in, face ashen. Your Grace, you need to see this. In the library, they found Edmund calmly going through estate papers, the magistrate beside him looking uncomfortable. What is this? Stephen demanded. Edmund didn't look up. A financial review. The magistrate has concerns about potential embezzlement. He held up a ledger. It seems large sums have been disappearing from the estate accounts, thousands of pounds over the past 3 years. That's impossible. Is it? Edmund's smile was poisonous. You've been locked in your tower, Stephen, mad with grief. Who's to say you haven't been squandering the family fortune? Or perhaps your American cook has been helping herself. After all, we already know she's a thief. The magistrate cleared his throat. Your Grace, I must ask you to account for these discrepancies. Stephen stared at the ledger, at numbers that made no sense, at years of careful accounting suddenly showing massive losses. Edmund had been planning this for months, maybe years, every piece carefully arranged. This is a lie, Stephen said. Prove it. Edmund's eyes glittered. Oh, wait, you can't because you've been too busy mourning to notice your own cousin bleeding your estate dry. The irony is delicious, don't you think? That afternoon, Edmund cornered Marianne in the kitchen. Last chance, Mrs. Clark. There's a coach to Liverpool tonight. A ship to Boston leaves Tuesday. I'll drop all charges, retract the newspaper story, even give you passage money. All you have to do is walk away. Why are you doing this? Because Stephen doesn't deserve Swanswood. He never did. I'm the eldest son's child. The dukedom should have been mine. But I'll settle for controlling it through his destruction. He leaned closer. Leave now or I'll make sure you're arrested alongside him. Accomplice to embezzlement carries a prison sentence, Mrs. Clark. Years in Newgate. Is your conscience worth that? She met his cold gaze. I'm staying. His face darkened. So be it. That night, Thomas found Marianne in the garden. Pack your things. Lord Edmund's hired men are coming tonight to take you by force. They're calling it a citizen's arrest. I heard them talking in the village. Where's Stephen? Meeting with his solicitor. He doesn't know yet. Marianne's blood ran cold. Edmund was done with subtle schemes. This was endgame. She found Stephen in his study, surrounded by papers, trying to make sense of the fraudulent accounts. Edmund's sending men tonight to take me. He stood immediately. Then we leave, both of us, now. And go where? He's destroyed your reputation, stolen your fortune. Running proves his accusations true. I don't care. He pulled her close. I won't let him hurt you. Then we fight, here, tonight, with the truth. What truth? He's covered his tracks perfectly. Marianne thought of the locked rooms, the missing papers, 3 years of isolation. Maybe not perfectly. Your fiancée, Caroline. Edmund said she died of suicide, but what if she didn't? Stephen went very still. What are you saying? I'm saying Edmund had motive to want this estate. He had access to this castle, and he benefits from your guilt keeping you locked away. She gripped his arms. Stephen, what if Caroline discovered his embezzlement? What if she confronted him? The color drained from his face. He wouldn't. He couldn't. Wouldn't he? Look what he's doing to us. What's one more death to a man like that? A crash echoed from downstairs, shouting, the sound of the front door splintering. They were out of time. Stephen grabbed her hand. The tower, now! They ran through corridors as heavy footsteps thundered below. Edmund's hired thugs calling for Mrs. Clark, threatening anyone who got in their way. Bess screamed. Thomas shouted a warning. They reached the tower stairs just as men rounded the corner. Stephen slammed the door. Through the bolt, it wouldn't hold long. In the tower room, surrounded by Caroline's portraits and 3 years of guilt, Stephen turned to Marianne. Rain lashed the windows. Below, the door shuddered under repeated blows. I love you, and he said. I should have said it before. I love you, Marianne Clark. And if we survive this night, I'm never letting you go. She kissed him as the door began to splinter. Then we'd better survive. The door burst open. Men flooded in, and Edmund Bellingham stood at the back, smiling his snake's smile, certain of victory. But he'd made one crucial mistake. He'd underestimated what two people with nothing left to lose could do. And the truth he'd buried 3 years ago was about to rise from its grave. The siege is closing. Edmund's trap is sprung. But Caroline's ghost holds the key to everything, and the next chapter reveals the secret that will either save them or damn them forever. Subscribe now to witness the truth that's been hidden in Swanswood's walls for 3 deadly years. Edmund's hired men filled the tower room, rough types from London, the kind who asked no questions if the money was good. The tallest one grabbed Marianne's arm. "Come quiet, Mrs. Clark, and no one gets hurt." "Take your hands off her." Stephen's voice was ice. The man sneered. "The Mad Duke giving orders? That's rich." He never saw Stephen's fist coming. The punch landed square, dropping him like a stone. Chaos erupted. Stephen fought like a demon possessed, 3 years of rage and grief finally finding an outlet. Thomas appeared into the doorway, wielding a fireplace poker, Bess behind him clutching a cast-iron pan. But there were too many. A club caught Stephen across the shoulder. He went down hard. "Stop!" Marianne screamed. Edmund stepped forward, producing a pistol from his coat. "Enough theatrics. Mrs. Clark, you're coming with me. Stephen, you're going to sign papers committing yourself to an asylum for your own protection. The magistrate is waiting downstairs." "You planned this," Stephen gasped, struggling to his feet. "All of it." "Of course I did. 3 years of careful work, and you almost ruined it by developing feelings for the help." Edmund's smile was cruel. "But even that plays into my hands now. The Mad Duke driven to delusion by a scheming woman. It's almost Shakespearean." "And Caroline?" Marianne asked, stepping forward. "Was her death part of your careful work too?" Edmund's face went very still. "Caroline killed herself. The inquest ruled. The inquest ruled what you wanted it to rule." Marianne's voice was steady despite her fear. "But I've been living in this pow for 3 months. I've seen the locker rooms, the missing account books, the gaps in the inventory. Caroline discovered you were stealing from the estate, didn't she?" "You're mad as he is." "Am I?" Marianne moved to Caroline's portrait and on the wall. "She was the daughter of a banker. She understood accounts. What did she find, Edmund? How much had you stolen?" Edmund's hand tightened on the pistol. "Careful, Mrs. Clark." But Stephen was staring at his cousin with dawning horror. "The night she died, you came to dinner. You brought wine from London. Special vintage, you said." Caroline drank 3 glasses. "I barely touched mine." "Circumstantial," Edmund snapped. "She complained of feeling ill." Stephen continued, pieces falling into place. "Said the room was spinning. You insisted she get air, walked her to the garden yourself. I stayed inside, dealing with the state business you'd conveniently brought that night." His voice cracked. "You poisoned her, then left the laudanum bottle in her hand to make it look like suicide." "Prove it," Edmund hissed. "I can." Mrs. Dalton's voice came from the doorway. The housekeeper stood there, face pale but determined. "I've kept something for 3 years. Didn't know what it meant until tonight." She held out a letter, paper yellowed with age. "Lady Caroline gave this to me the day before she died. Said if anything happened to her, I should give it to the magistrate." "But you terrified me, Lord Edmund. Made me think his grace had done it. I was too frightened to speak." Stephen took the letter with shaking hands, read aloud. "If you're reading this, I am dead. Edmund Bellingham has stolen over £30,000 from the Swanswood estate. I have proof, account books, forgeries, everything. I confronted him today. He smiled and said, 'Some problems solve themselves.' I fear what that means. If I die suddenly, it was not by my own hand. Edmund Bellingham is a murderer." The silence that followed was absolute. Edmund's face had gone white, then red. "That's a forgery." "With her signature? Witnessed by the family solicitor?" Mrs. Dalton's voice trembled, but held firm. "I checked before I came up here. Mr. Hartwell confirmed he witnessed it the day before her death." The magistrate appeared in the doorway, having heard everything. "Lord Edmund Bellingham, I'm placing you under arrest for the murder of Lady Caroline Ashworth and the embezzlement of estate funds." Edmund's eyes went wild. He swung the pistol toward Marianne. I won't hang for this. I won't. Stephen launched himself forward. The gun went off, deafening in the enclosed space. The bullet struck the portrait of Caroline, punching through her painted heart. Stephen and Edmund crashed to the floor, fighting desperately. The pistols skittered away. Thomas and the magistrate pulled them apart. Edmund was screaming now, incoherent, the mask of charm completely shattered. It should have been mine. The title, the estate, everything. My father was the elder son. I was cheated. You were given a generous allowance and position, Stephen said, breathing hard. But it was never enough, was it? Nothing was ever enough, Edmund spat blood. So I took what should have been mine. And when that foolish girl discovered it, I removed her. Just like I would have removed you, cousin, if you'd stayed locked in your grief like you were supposed to. The confession hung in the air like smoke. The magistrate nodded to his men. Take him to Northampton jail. The judge will hear this in the morning. As they dragged Edmund away, still screaming threats and denials, Stephen sank into a chair. His hands were shaking. 3 years. I spent 3 years believing Caroline killed herself because I failed her. Because I wasn't enough. Marianne knelt beside him. You didn't fail her. Edmund murdered her, and she knew it was coming. That's why she left the letter. He pulled her close, burying his face against her shoulder. For the first time since Caroline's death, he wept. Not quiet tears, but deep, wrenching sobs that shook his whole body. Marianne held him, stroking his hair, letting him purge 3 years of poisoned grief. Mrs. Dalton wiped her eyes. Thomas put a hand on Stephen's shoulder. Even the magistrate looked moved. When Stephen finally lifted his head, his eyes were red but clear, clearer than they'd been in years. I'm free, he whispered. God help me. I'm finally free. Marianne touched his face. We both are. Below in the entrance hall, they heard Edmund's carriage departing for the jail. The castle seemed to exhale, as if releasing a poison that had festered in its walls too long. Thomas cleared his throat. Begging your pardon, your grace. But the whole household heard his confession. Word will spread by morning. Good, Stephen said, standing. Let it spread. Let everyone know the truth. He pulled Marianne to her feet, keeping her hand in his, and let them know something else. That I intend to marry this woman, society be damned. Mrs. Dalton smiled through tears. About time, your grace. The rain had stopped. Through the tower window, moonlight broke through clouds, touching the gardens where Caroline had died, where truth had finally, after 3 long years, come to light. Edmund was gone, but his poison lingered. In the days that followed, Stephen moved through the castle like a man waking from a long nightmare. The estate accounts were recovered, Edmund's forgeries exposed. The 30,000 pounds he'd stolen would be difficult to reclaim, but the truth was worth more than money. Northampton society, faced with evidence of Edmund's guilt, turned shamefaced. Letters of apology arrived. The bishop himself called to offer condolences. Lady Victoria Hartley returned to London without a word, but Stephen barely noticed. He spent hours in Caroline's room, reading her letters, studying her portrait, trying to reconcile the woman he'd mourned with the woman who'd been brave enough to leave evidence that would expose her murderer. Marianne found him there on the 3rd night, sitting in darkness. You should eat something, she said softly. I should have protected her. His voice was hollow. If I'd paid attention, if I'd noticed Edmund's theft sooner, he would have found another way. Men like Edmund always do. She sat beside him. Caroline was trying to save you, Stephen. That's why she documented everything. She knew what he was, and she made sure you'd eventually know too. But it took 3 years. 3 years of thinking she'd chosen death over life with me. 3 years of Edmund's lies. But they're over now. Marianne took his hand. The question is, what do you do with the truth? He turned to her, eyes haunted. I don't know how to move forward. Every time I try, I feel her watching, judging. What right do I have to be happy when she's dead because I was blind? Stephen, Marianne's voice was gentle but firm. Carolyn didn't die because you were blind. She died because Edmund was a murderer. You're not betraying her by living. You're honoring her sacrifice. Am I? He pulled away, moving to the window. Or am I just using her death as an excuse to take what I want? A second chance I don't deserve. Who says you don't deserve it? I do. The words burst from him. I loved her, Marianne. Maybe not the way I should have, maybe not enough, but I loved her, and now she's gone. And I'm falling in love with you, and it feels like betrayal. The confession hung in the cold air. Marianne stood, crossing to him. I loved my husband too. Not perfectly, not without regrets, but I loved him. His death nearly destroyed me. The accusations, the scandal, the loneliness. I came here thinking I'd never feel anything again, that I'd just survive, nothing more. She took his face in her hands, forcing him to look at her. But you made me feel alive again, Stephen Bellingham. And I refuse to apologize for that. I refuse to feel guilty for wanting more than survival. Carolyn wouldn't want that for you, Tom. She left that letter so you could be free, not so you could lock yourself in a different cage. How do you know what she'd want? Because I'm a woman who loved a broken man enough to die trying to save him. Her voice cracked. If I were Carolyn, I'd be grateful someone else had the chance to finish what I started. I'd want you to live, Stephen. To really live, not just exist. He stared at her, eyes glistening. I don't know how. Then let me teach you. She pulled him close. Let me show you that love isn't a betrayal of the past. It's proof we survived it. He kissed her then, desperately, his hands tangling in her hair. Not the careful kiss of their first night in the library, but something raw and honest, flavored with salt from tears neither could stop. When they broke apart, he rested his forehead against hers. I'm terrified, he whispered. So am I. What if I fail you like I failed her? What if you don't? She smiled through tears. What if we build something neither of us could have built alone? What if we're brave enough to try? He pulled back, studying her face in the moonlight. Then slowly he crossed to Caroline's portrait, stood before it for a long moment. I'm sorry I couldn't save you, he said quietly. I'm sorry I didn't see what Edmund was. But you saved me, Carolyn. That letter, that courage. You gave me the truth when I drowned in lies. He paused. And now I have to choose what to do with it. I have to choose to live, even though you can't. I hope wherever you are, you understand. The portrait stared back, silent, painted eyes holding secrets only the dead could know. Stephen turned to Marianne. Marry me. Her breath caught. Stephen, I know it's too fast. I know society will talk. I know all the reasons it's impossible. He took her hands. But I've spent 3 years being reasonable, being careful, letting fear make my choices. I'm done with that. I love you, Marianne Clark. I want to wake up beside you. I want to rebuild this castle with you. I want to spend whatever time I have left making you as happy as you've made me. So marry me. Not someday. Soon, now. Tears streamed down her face. You'll have to renounce privileges. The crown won't approve a duke marrying a cook without concessions. Then I'll renounce whatever it takes. Title, lands, every privilege except the one that matters. The right to spend my life with you. People will call you mad. They already do. He smiled, the first real smile she'd seen. At least this time they'll be right. I'm mad about you, Marianne, completely, impossibly mad. She laughed through her tears. Then yes, I'll marry you. He pulled her close, and in Caroline's room, surrounded by ghosts and memories, 2 damaged souls made a promise that would change everything. Behind them, the portrait seemed to soften in the moonlight. Or perhaps it was just shadows shifting. But for the first time since Caroline's death, the room didn't feel haunted. It felt like release, like forgiveness, like the beginning of something new rising from the ashes of grief. Stephen and Marianne left the room hand in hand, closing the door gently behind them. Tomorrow they would petition the crown. Tomorrow they would face society's judgment. But tonight they simply held each other in the tower where it had all begun, and let themselves believe that love could be stronger than loss, that healing was possible, that even the deepest darkness couldn't last forever. Winter came to Northampton in shades of white and silver. Snow blanketed the castle grounds, softening the edges of stone that had witnessed so much darkness. Inside Swanswood, warmth returned by degrees, not just from the fires Marianne kept burning, but from something deeper, hope. Stephen's petition to the crown caused sensation in London. A duke requesting permission to renounce certain hereditary privileges to marry beneath his station without parliamentary approval. The newspapers called it unprecedented. Society called it scandalous. The Queen, in a rare moment of romantic sentiment, called it approved. Edmund's trial lasted 3 days. Caroline's letter, the recovered account books, and the testimony of witnesses broke his defense like brittle ice. He was sentenced to hang, though the sentence was later commuted to transportation to Australia. Even murderers with noble blood received certain mercies. He left England screaming Stephen's name, swearing vengeance from whatever hell awaited him. Stephen slept better after that. Not perfectly, but better. On a cold December morning, 6 months after Marianne had first stepped off that mail coach into Northampton fog, the chapel bells of Swanswood rang for the first time in a decade. The chapel was small, ancient stone and stained glass that cast colored light across worn pews. No grand society wedding, no hundreds of guests, just the people who mattered. Mrs. Dalton, weeping openly. Thomas Granger in his best coat, grinning like a proud father. Bess Fletcher clutching flowers from the restored gardens. The magistrate who'd arrested Edmund. A handful of loyal tenants. The vicar who'd initially refused but changed his mind after seeing the crown's approval. Marianne wore cream silk, simple but elegant, with lace at the collar her mother had tatted years ago. Her dark hair was loose under a simple veil. No jewels, no ostentation. Just a woman who'd crossed an ocean and survived scandal to find home in the arms of a broken duke. Stephen waited at the altar in dark wool, his hair finely trimmed properly, eyes clear for the first time in years. When Marianne began her walk down the aisle, his breath caught audibly. Thomas had to nudge him to remember to breathe. The vicar began the service, voice echoing off stone. Dearly beloved, we are gathered here. But Stephen barely heard the words. He was watching Marianne, memorizing every detail. The way candlelight caught her eyes, the slight tremble in her hands holding the flowers, the smile that said she was as terrified and hopeful as he was. When the vicar asked if anyone objected, the silence was absolute. No one dared. Do you, Stephen James Bellingham, take this woman? I do. His voice was steady, sure. 3 years ago he'd been a ghost. Now he was alive. Do you, Marianne Elizabeth Clark, take this man? I do. Her voice carried to every corner. No hesitation, no doubt. Stephen slipped a gold band onto her finger, the metal warm from his pocket. With this ring, I thee wed. She did the same, her hand steady now. With this ring, I thee wed. I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss your bride. He did, thoroughly, long enough that Mrs. Dalton giggled and Thomas whistled. When they finally broke apart, both were smiling through tears. As they walked back down the aisle, husband and wife, the chapel bells began to ring. Great bronze bells that had been silent since Stephen's father's funeral. The sound rolled across the valley, announcing to all of Northampton that Swanswood Castle was alive again. Outside, snow fell gently. Tenants lined the path, holding lanterns despite the daylight, offering quiet congratulations. Not the grand spectacle of a society wedding, but something better, genuine. A carriage waited, decorated with ribbons. But before they climbed in, Marianne turned to look at the castle. 4 towers no longer menacing, but majestic. Windows glowing with light. Gardens visible beneath the snow, waiting for spring. Home, she whispered. Stephen pulled her close. Our home, finally. That night, after a modest celebration where even Mrs. Dalton danced, they stood together in the tower room, the same room where Edmund had been arrested, where Stephen had proposed. But it felt different now, lighter. Caroline's portrait had been moved to the gallery where it belonged. In its place hung a new painting, Swanswood Castle in spring, gardens blooming, light streaming through every window, a vision of what could be. Do you think she'd approve? Stephen asked, gazing at the new painting. Marianne leaned against him. I think she'd be glad you finally let yourself live. He turned to her, cupping her face. I love you, Marianne Bellingham. Every stubborn, brave, impossible inch of you. Bellingham, she tested the name. It suits me better than Clark ever did. Everything suits you. He kissed her softly, but especially that smile, the one that says you've stopped running. We've both stopped running. Below them, the castle hummed with life, fires burning, dinner cooking. Thomas had insisted on preparing the wedding feast himself, laughter from the servants' hall, the sound of a place that had remembered what it was to be a home instead of a tomb. Snow continued to fall, blanketing the grounds in white. Somewhere in the village, word spread of the wedding, of the American cook who'd become a duchess, of the dad who'd chosen love over propriety. Some would gossip, some would judge. Neither Stephen nor Marianne cared. They'd faced darker things than gossip, scandal, murder, grief that should have destroyed them both, and they'd survived together. In the spring, they would plant new gardens. In the summer, they would repair the east wing. In time, perhaps there would be children's laughter in these ancient halls, new life to chase away old ghosts. But for now, on this cold December night, it was enough to stand in the tower room, no longer haunted, and know they'd found what both had been searching for since the day grief first touched their lives. Not perfection, not a fairy tale, but something real and hard-won and infinitely precious. Each other. And in Swanswood Castle, where darkness had reigned for 3 long years, the bells kept ringing, the fires kept burning, and 2 souls who'd crossed oceans of pain finally came home. If this tale of forbidden love, deadly secrets, and second chances captured your heart, subscribe for more stories where passion defies propriety and love conquers even the darkest past. Because every castle has its secrets, and every soul deserves a chance at redemption. Join us for the next journey.
If you enjoyed this story, we appreciate you a whole lot and look forward to connecting with you as we build a community on this channel. Every day, we will put out more stories, so we need your support. Help us by liking, sharing, and subscribing to our channel if you haven't already. You won't miss any new exciting videos. Check out the next video. You'll love it!